Shalom. Yes, another one. So eventually, this thing is supposed to be 24/7. So the fact that it's happening over and over again should not be surprising. But I wasn't actually planning on doing a Just Chatting stream today. Well, at least not until after Father Eric's Just Chatting stream. But somebody who shall remain nameless was going to have a discussion with me, and we were going to speak one on one. And that person is a no show. Howdy, Greg. Although I do have to say, Greg, I have to wonder if you wouldn't be better off doing things offline with real people than spending so much time online. But I ain't the boss of you. As much as I like to pretend that I am the boss of everyone. So I'm guessing Fezzi's live stream was good. I did not get to watch it. Rain is good. Rain is in fact good. We could be real meta and watch Chezi's earlier Just Chatting stream. I think I'm going to be really, really meta and watch Chezi's earlier Just Chatting stream, which went 3.5 hours. My Lord in heaven. There is Mr. Chezi himself. Ta-da! We'll do it this way. I don't know if you guys can hear this. Let me know if you can't hear this. Atheism is definitely a sin. No sound. Why is the sound not working? Well, one of these days. Figure out how to use this Voicemeeter 64 potato correctly. Grizz Waldegrim said, I checked a bit earlier. It was 3 hours of Mark and Manuel show, as far as I could tell. Well, I told Mark that he can only spend so much time um, talking on my channel because he talks a lot. And will God punish you in this life? You spend way too much time thinking about punishment. Let me see if I can try to figure this out. So, as he's speaking is not. Rabbi Malot was there. Hmm. Yeah, Grizz, I don't like that because it makes life difficult, but I guess I could do that. Whale song in the back? There was a whale song in the back? There's a whale song in the back? I am not aware of a whale song low key in the back. Hmm. Oh, well, yeah, trucks go by all the time. I guess I will old school this like Mr. Griswold Grimm says.
For Jacob. I don't know if you're aware, but Jacob has offered graciously his channel to do streaming on. He would like to have something like a 24-hour network channel that has different people speaking on it. And so far, there's been actually a nice amount of people joining and doing this. So I've been doing a few of these, and I take these. I took this little slot right now, and I guess I'm waiting for more people to join. Sometimes people are going to join and have a discussion. And yeah, open to have conversations with people, talk about religion, talk about the meaning crisis, and as much as I can, assist, help, learn myself. That would be the general agenda. Okay, you're under the weather. I'm very sorry to hear that. As we say, refuah shlema. You have a full and speedy recovery. I was thinking a little as we get into these weekly portions of the Bible, so a lot of the good stories. I'm thinking, well, I guess we'll start with Abraham. Just when he in Brit Ben Abetarim, when he is making his pact, his covenant with God, there's a line. There's there's a verse that says, "Vayotze oto achutza, vayomar habet na hashamayim usfor hakochavim, im tuchal lisfor otam, vayomar lo ko yeh zarecha." Then in the vision, God took him outside and said, "Look towards the heaven."
If he wasn't loyal to my tribe, he would steal, I think you mean, Fezzi, for your network. I still was not aware that we have rival networks. Hopefully, when when the actual network gets going, I am going to assign you at least 3 hours. But you don't like having fixed hours, do you, Mr. Grimm? And I'm thinking no LARPing on our TBN channel, so you're gonna have to admit to your real legal functional name, which might be a barrier to entry for LARPers such as yourself, Mr. Griswold Grimm. But I'm not sure I'm going to impose that on you. Not possible to not LARP. I disagree. I think we can, in fact, not LARP. Casey Clements says, Chezi, not Sherry, is a very good host. He is. He asks good questions. He does. And keeps the conversation going well. Yes, Chezi is in many ways the perfection. And I know. I'll sooner start a GoFundMe to change my legal name to match the truth. Damn autocorrect. Well, in more ways than you think, I actually think that autocorrect, part of what has led to our society becoming less intelligent, is in fact the fact that autocorrect makes it very difficult to know who doesn't know how to spell. Because while I am not the biggest fan of spelling tyranny, I do think that to some extent, when we don't know who knows how to spell and who doesn't know how to spell, it becomes much harder to distinguish the idiots from the intelligent people.
Heaven and count the stars, you are able to count them. And there's something about when it says over here, and God took him outside. And I guess one could look at this as actually he took him outside to left his tent and looked at and gazed up to the sky. But I'm sort of connecting this to Moses when at the cleft of the rock when he's asking to see God's glory, and God said, "You can't; you could only see my back." Right? And we learn from that you could see me sort of in history. But I'm sort of connecting that to this thing about God took him outside, sort of like a zoom out view. You can imagine Abraham's having a hard time understanding how all these things are relevant, and like you're going to be sending my descendants to slavery. How is he okay with all this? How is he sort of chill with all this? And like, for example, during this covenant, he's being told that his descendants are going to suffer, yet he seems to be fairly relaxed. And while what happens with Saddam comes up, he's all up in arms, challenging God. Why did he feel the need to do that here? And I'm thinking back about took him outside, is sort of took him out of himself, give him like a meta view, a bird's eye view of the whole situation. And once Avram could sort of fully comprehend, I don't know if he fully comprehended, but get a better grasp of God's greater plan, he sort of was relaxed about this pact and its ramifications down the line. So this is something I'm thinking about. If any of that made sense or didn't make sense, you guys are welcome to let me know. Howdy, Aaron. I hope all.
Christians have this weird idea that Bein Habetarim, like Jesus, something Jesus. But of course, Christians have this weird idea that everything is something Jesus.
As well, sir. Another thing I was thinking about in that vein, I guess, is with regards to Isaac. Vehi ki zaken Yitzchak v'tikahen enav v'marot v'yikra et Esav beno hagadol v'yomar alav beni v'yomar alav hineni. When Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see, he calls his son Esau. So there's something about that as well, which I'm comparing this or contrasting this to when Adam and Eve eat, so to speak, from the forbidden fruit, and their eyes are opened up. There was a fascinating conversation between Bernardo and Jonathan Peugeot about the fall from heaven. And Bernardo had an interesting take on that, which was more specific about eating the fruit is from a scientific point of view, you're seeing humans' development, evolution into metacognition, and sort of leaving the world of instinct, which brings them to where we are today and the ramifications of that. But when I look at the Tika Enav and his eyes were dim, it makes me think about, it's more than just a physical dimness, but maybe post the experience he had with his father and being brought up on the altar as a sacrifice, even though that didn't happen, it would require a tremendous amount of belief and sort of, like to sort of push down your own feelings about what you're doing. Isaac is giving himself up to this idea. He doesn't have this relationship with God yet his father does. And you have to imagine that there was potentially like a PTSD effect on Isaac. There's other indications of this sort of when he's out praying in the field, and you can see that maybe there's some sort of meditative transformation in him where he sort of needs to now connect to God in a different way. However, more specifically about this verse, you could say that post sacrifice with Abraham, he went to a place where he no longer sees good and evil in the same way, sort of pre-forbidden fruit status, and he can't see the difference between Isaac and Jacob in a certain way. And that's difficult for him to comprehend. And that's why when he ends up finding
between Esav and Jacob
out, how is it translated over here? Into finding out that what happened with the blessings and his world fall apart, and you could potentially say that he suddenly realized, it dawned on him how skewed his vision was. So yeah, I'm thinking about that as well. See a lot of howdies over here. Howdy, Aaron. Howdy, Rabbi Rafi. But there's another Tifakach Nehem, I think, with Hagar and Ishmael, right? She goes to the well. I mentioned this earlier. I was talking about the well, and I was talking about Ishmael becoming an archer and the psychological aspects of that in the verse. But also there it says the angel opened up her eyes. And I mentioned this earlier that when Abraham sends Hagar out, seemingly it sounds like crazy, but he just sent her out to die. He must have known there's a well nearby and sent her to like a known location. And maybe when it says like the angel opened their eyes, it's, she's in this crazy panic with her son. And I mean, we even in humans experience this, like you could be in a panic and not see what's right in front of you. And sometimes you need to learn how to relax and be back in the moment and gain control to see around you. I wonder if that relates also to the JP Jordan Peterson move with the copper snake with the exposure therapy, right? Like just seeing it allows you sort of to get over that. And here too, you sort of see the Bible giving you even a certain psychological insight of a person's mode when he's in a panic, and how you could become blind when you're in that state. Yeah, I really love these portions of the Bible. So rich with so much, just dense with information. It was nice to see Bernardo back to this conversation with Jonathan Peugeot, see him just being flabbergasted by the insight that the Bible has. I mean, he recites it as 2,000 years ago in Babylon, this is being written. But even then, he's saying the tremendous amount of inspiration one would need to be able to write a story like the creation. Truly divinely inspired. We read, okay, let's see. Aaron, we read from Nehemiah at church today. I'm not sure what we are talking about. I was specifically talking about Abraham and the covenant he had with God and sort of some of the verses over there. And also conversation, comparison between Isaac's eyes, the contrast between Isaac's eyes going dim and Adam and Eve's eyes opening up, and sort of the differences over there. So that's what I was discussing. With regards to Nehemiah, also fascinating. Ezra and Nehemiah, the scribes, very impactful on Judaism, sort of almost like a second mini Sinai, just them post-exile. The Jews are coming back. Many of them don't even know Hebrew. It's hard to believe. Once they start reading from the parchment, from the Torah, people start crying because
there is an ambulance going by, and Chazi apparently doesn't know about the common lectionary. I should probably tell him about the lectionary. But does he really need to know about the lectionary?
This is information they've never heard before. We're definitely me. I'm very fortunate. How many called Sifrei Torah, scrolls of Torah we have in our synagogue? It was highly uncommon to have any around. Just the king had one. And what we also find out later in the Bible that there was many portions of time that there was no scroll to be found. They didn't even know what was written inside. So just to think about how impactful that was for them to sort of hear these words again that ring true to them, but in some way also don't sound familiar to them. They weren't aware of them. I use this as an example many times, saying that today in Israel, we are far more religious than let's say the Jews were or the Israelites were at the time of Ezra and Nehemiah coming back post First Temple destruction and exile. I was also thinking as part of the meaning crisis, and I guess any of you that are listening could let me know how much of this is, I guess, ideology versus family. And to expand on that, I mean, it definitely growing up. Mark over here. Hello, sir.
Hello.
How was your day?
You said meaning crisis. I'm like, all right, I'm in.
I said meaning crisis. Yeah, there was some Bible talk there, but yeah, I guess as far as the meaning crisis, and you could take it from here, I guess at that point. But I was wondering how much it's ideology versus family, and what I mean is in the meaning crisis, how much of is there? Let's say we'll take an individual that is feeling this sense of crisis and a lack of meaning, and how much of that is also the fear of if I act on a certain way off this crisis, what does that mean towards me and my family? I guess this is more of like in a religious context, but how is it true in the States or specifically with Christians that the family still has a very strong ideology? I'm asking, and that if one feels in a place of crisis, does he feel comfortable enough to sort of remove himself from the family, knowing that he's still going to be loved by the family? Or is there, if you're dealing with this crisis and we're not, then you're out? And like, does that sort of compound the problem of this crisis? Like someone feels like not only do I can't find this answer within. If I go to, let's say, father, pastor, brother, they're like, no, if you're not towing the line, then you're out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I see what you're getting at here. So what I think I want to do is take one step back and do some quick sort of framing on meaning crisis stuff. So the way John Vervaeke talks about the meaning crisis, which I find very compelling, obviously, and I have many criticisms of John, but not these, is he talks about it, as part of something, we'll say, bigger than mere religion or mere ideology, right? And so one might think about it as, well, why are there so many ideologies popping up? And you could say, well, that's part of the meaning crisis, right? Because we need a framework, and we're scrambling for frameworks to give us meaning, and ideologies happen, right? Like that's one way to think about it. I'm not saying that's the only way to think about it, but he also makes this division in the series about there's people who are religious who are like, we'll say, in a meaning crisis, right? But there's a lot of people who are NONES, right? They don't identify within that tradition and within any religious tradition. And because they don't identify with any religious tradition, their crises is of a fundamentally different type, right? And the way I see that, and this is just me, is you have a group of, say, like Bridges to Meaning, for example, right? You have a group of traumatized Christians. And what they need is very, very different from what the NONESs, or what I call the cluelesses, need. So the NONESs could probably be divided as, some of them are traumatized religious folks, so they could be Christian, Muslim, or Jewish, or whatever. But then there's a bunch of people like me who grew up entirely outside of religion. So, which is not to say I didn't go to a Catholic church, but like that wasn't pushed. And even at Catholic school, and they didn't make us read the Bible, right? Like, so it was like, wait, what? Right? They didn't. So a lot of this language, I don't even have it. Like when I go on BOM and they start talking about theology, I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like I can't keep
That's interesting that you're saying that. Jacob had a line in one of our conversations that he said, like, your FFB or RFG, religious from birth is just like a Jewish word for that. So I had to, my sort of knee-jerk reaction was like, listen, Jacob, like, okay, I could sort of remove myself from myself, right? I could think sort of, or try to attempt to think what a secular person would think. And I mentioned sort of, and I guess it was just more of a like a defense mechanism, like, I have like secular siblings, and like, however, I understand, like you're pointing out that it really is sort of a different frame, and in many ways, I'm very privileged in a certain extent, and I'm sure there's other, that I have this framework to work with. On the other hand, you could say that like I'm sort of, closed within this framework, and it's hard to see sort of what's out there. But I guess, and this relates to the meaning crisis, which is, like you just said, Bridges of Meaning is a very specific type, I guess. Maybe I'm wrong, but I have a sense that it's more religious. Am I wrong about that?
No, it is. And just to back this up, so one of the struggles I had for a couple of years was I was trying to explain what the meaning crisis, trying to define the meaning crisis for my aunt and my uncle. My uncle passed away last a year ago. Yeah, it was not. He was a wonderful person. He was the type of person that ended every phone conversation with God bless. Like he was just, that's just the type of person he was. But obviously he was very religious. My aunt's very religious, right? So the rest of the siblings that she has, not going Catholic church anymore, traumatized by the church, whatever, fair enough. The stories I've heard, some of them are terrible, although they're not all that bad. But for them, they were really traumatic. But I could not, until very recently, and after many attempts, explain to her what the meaning crisis was. And I'm not sure she would understand it in the sort of way that then we'll say, I could even explain it to you, right? So I'm not sure she gets the language of it. Like she could talk meaning crisis to people. I'm pretty sure she could. But I knew she got it, right? Because she said, really, there are people like that out there? I'll pray for them. I'm like, well, there you go. Now you know, right? So, which I think is the proper response for somebody like that. Maybe not for everybody. Like maybe there are crazy people like Manuel and myself and others who will dive in and talk to people who are sitting, 4 steps from nihilism, right? And try to work with them and to varying degrees of success, including mostly not success, right? But that's very different from, in my mind, that's very different from evangelization. It's very different from being, and I might be mischaracterizing what Jacob says, being a priest, right, to the non-priestly class or something, right? To me, and I might be wrong about this, it's a very different thing to be there with those people and try to help them out.
I guess just hearing you say that, like I'm looking at you specifically in a whole different light right now, which is, I mean, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but isn't there like another layer of frustration that you have in this specific, setting, which is like, aside from like guys listening to me about the meaning crisis, like I also have to deal with, and by I mean Mark, I have to deal with all this Christian religious talk as well. Or do you see that? I guess I'm asking you, like, because it seems to me like Manuel uses that sort of as a tool to have conversations with people via, the same jargon or terminology. And you could be saying that's fine. John Vervaeke is clearly, and the conversations John Vervaeke and Jonathan Pajor are having are trying to have that, like, meet in the middle with, what these terms mean to each other with regards to understanding them. I wonder how much, well, I guess we see that with Paul, though. It seems like he's trying to integrate John Vervaeke, right? But via the religious prism. Do you agree with that move that Paul's doing? And that doesn't mean that you're saying, like, live and let live. Like, I know you're fine with it, but like, my question is, are you endorsing that? And you don't have to answer that if that's too specific.
Yeah, no. I think so. The framing that you're missing is one of my messages, and there was the last Friday Q&A that Paul did before he basically went on vacation was actually with Manuel, and so it's on his channel. It's I forget when it was. Was it May? Was it June? I don't remember, but it was back then. And they had a lovely talk. It was really, really good talk. And then we got a question in the middle from one of the BOMers at the time, at least spending a lot of time on BOM. And I felt compelled to jump in, and I jumped in, and Paul was gracious enough to be appreciative of my framing and the way I put it. But basically, what I was saying is, as a Christian or a Jew, even, you can go and you can say, why is Vervaeke making up words? Because he's making up words, and you guys already have words for that. Absolutely, like, fair enough, right? But the reason why he's making up the words, and this is what's really important, the concepts that he's running into now, like really late in life, because I think he's getting up there, right? Right. Those concepts are new to him. Right? They're not new to me, although I don't have the religious language. You don't need the language. The language isn't that important, right? That's the key, right? So, but those concepts, forget about the language. Well, oh yeah, you didn't have the concept. Like, actually doesn't understand the concept, right? And so the bridging the gap is important, but it's important that you meet people where they're at, because if you come at them with Christian or Jewish language, they can't understand any of it because they don't have the concepts behind the language. Sorry to go on so long, Chad.
Not at all. Sorry, Chad, go ahead. I was going to ask them, but please take it away.
I was just waving hello to Michael.
Oh, hey, Michael.
Hi, everybody.
Michael, I also actually later on, I wanted, I wrote a note here to myself if you jumped on, but I wanted to talk about your program, school. But Mark, something you were saying, so you're saying John Vervaeke, right now, he comes along to this language, right? And let's say us religious folk are like, welcome to the party. Great. Now that you have this language, we could have this conversation. Do you think that Sam Harris, we'll use him as an example, is oblivious of that language?
No, concepts. It starts with concepts, right? John runs into the concept, he makes up new words, and in religious people aren't like, hey, welcome to the party. They're like, why are you using these strange words? We already have words for that. That really means this. And then they get into a theological discussion. And the problem with that, with somebody like John Vervaeke, is John read the Bible. He can do theology. Like, I can't do theology. It's a complete waste. Don't talk theology to me, please. It doesn't work. I can't. I'm not there. I don't have any framing, right? But he can, and he'll beat you over the head with your own theology pretty quickly because he's really, really bright, right? So that's not the correct approach. Correct approach is to meet him where he's at with his language and move him further along the concepts. And then to tie it back to Sam Harris. Sam Harris is this archetype that I've been sort of looking for in history that I haven't quite found. I've found some examples of the articulate idiot. Like, he did just stuff he doesn't understand conceptually, and that's obvious. Like, if you're not bright enough to understand that you're not going to see God with a telescope, I don't know how far I can get you along the path, but it's not going to be very far, and that's okay, because religion has a way to deal with that. But it's good. But we need to note that, right? Because we need to have compassion for somebody who's just not able to understand what to us is a very simple concept, and to him just is too hard for his brain.
It's so simple to be like, why is he not getting this? That it's almost alarming. It makes you sort of wonder,
yes.
He must be like, 4D chess this, because like, I'm just not understanding how he's not getting this. And I mentioned this in an earlier video which is like, it seems clear today that they lost. You know what I mean? Like, the new atheists, that like, it's just, and like, it was percolating like 10 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, him and the Four Horsemen going around selling their books. And now I just feel like even Paul's review of The Cosmic Skeptic, which is like, I saw his conversation about Jordan Peterson. Oh, he's so like, enough. Like, it's clearly he's not having the conversation I don't know. It's almost juvenile in a certain extent. And I don't know. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Sean. Take it
Well,
away.
when I see this stuff, to me, it just it reminds me of how, I mean, this is just how people are. If you could take a New Testament theological trope, which is, they see like the disciples or whatever see Jesus do these things, and then they completely forget. It seems as though they completely forget that he's done these miracles, and then they're always going back to him like, can you show me again? And then he shows them again, then they forget, and then he dies and or he's crucified, then he resurrects and nobody recognizes him. It's like, this is a completely human thing. Like, we can't see 100% of everything 100% of the time. And a lot of this stuff, I was actually thinking about this. Like, it seems like, did you guys ever see Stargate SG-1, the show?
Yes.
So what's interesting about that show is there's a thread in that show where everybody's wrestling with religions, but they do like a materialist answer to the religion, but they use the Stargate to go, this crew of like, somebody's an archaeologist, somebody's a scientist, somebody's a soldier, somebody's an alien who, so you got this group of people who keep going through the Stargate and finding a new culture with a new sense of religion. And then you have, some evil being that's the Goa'uld, who are kind of trying to control everybody. And they're still trying to wrestle with all this stuff and see, I don't know. There's something to that. I know that this is really dumb. Probably most people listening to this are thinking, what the hell is he talking about? But think about the Stargate SG-1 model. It's like, there's something similar to what we're doing here, where a bunch of us we have some ideas, we venture off into we use this Stargate, we venture off into some new culture and, or even our own culture, which is new to us in some ways. And we're wrestling with all these questions. And we just constantly, you could be given the answer in full right now and you'll forget it in 10 minutes. I think that's just kind of how we are. And I think there's something really strong to pay attention to as far as that goes.
Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, and one of my complaints that you probably haven't heard is that the church has receded, and that's sort of, to some extent, I think Jacob's talking about too, right? The Jewish priest class has receded, right? They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. I think the churches have receded, and I often use the example that in South Carolina, all of the hospitals were owned by religious orders, and now none of them are, right? So like, that's, and there were many more Catholic schools when I was growing up than there are now, right? Like, those are small examples, but I think that if you take it on the totality, where the church has said, okay, government, okay, Caesar, right? You can run charity, which you can call welfare, you can call it whatever you want, call it UBI. You run all that stuff, and we'll stop doing that. That's a recession. That's a moving away from. And that's part of the problem that I complain about, is that you guys left the congregation. The congregation didn't leave you.
So, Michael, I want to sort of use this to sort of springboard into what you were doing. I'm going to just give what I understand you were doing. Let me know, obviously, if you're representing this.
Sure.
And it sort of relates to what Mark was just saying, more specific in the Jewish frame, but we'll expand on that. So, Michael, from what I understand, would like to open up some sort of school, workshop, and where students could come, assuming it's co-ed, and I'm not exactly sure about the ages, but students could come and actually work with their hands. So they'll do different manual labor. And while doing so, having some sort of framework, which is religious/biblical, which they could see how biblical narratives and messages can be embodied in actual day-to-day work. Am I getting that right? Or
yeah, I think that's the basic concept of it.
Okay.
And I'm designing it so it's very like open source and adaptable. Like, I have like my specific version that I think I would actually run, but then hopefully I can just give the information and other people could do it slightly different ways. But
okay, so I guess let's say we'll keep that general idea up here for a second.
Yeah, so this apprenticeship.
Asking if that's possible. I'm sure there could be a model like that. So I'm just looking at some of my notes of here. Okay, so I had over here that it feels like in Judaism, and you let me know if this makes sense to you guys, there's been sort of a push of all the religious life to basically be inside the synagogue. And again, it's unique to Israel, but if we'll think about the Babylonian Jew for a moment, and he has to deal with dietary restrictions and agricultural restrictions, and there's a tremendous amount of rules and regulations that the Bible, the Torah, gives us. And that would really allow one to really embody and connect sort of to God, whether he's planting seeds or making his clothing, and all. If on the Sabbath, where you could carry your different things in your hand. So there's a tremendous amount of things that the Bible and the Torah had covered. However, in 2022, all my agriculture already is being taken care of on sort of from the government, state, and religious. All those things are taken care of. And it's the same with you're not allowed to sell swine in religious neighborhoods. So I don't even have to worry. I've never seen that even in Jerusalem. So all these things have sort of been, I don't have to really participate in them anymore because they've been taken care of. And I sort of live my life in that way, but not really ever embodying it in a certain extent. So if there was I could check the boxes of yes, I took care of this dietary restriction, but there's no conscious point of me being aware of that. However, when it comes to, let's say, the daily prayers and blessings, those are still relevant, more so to speak. And that happens inside the synagogue, even though Corona definitely whittled to that as well. So I think about a school that you're doing, and I wonder to myself, in a certain extent, I want to tell my son, you're going to learn about this in Bible studies about all these agricultural things, but they're not relevant anymore. Not because you can't do them, because you're never going to have to be dealing with them. However, if you want to feel like this embodied feeling again, then you got to sort of infuse life like back into it. So it could be go to Michael's school and work on the land for a year, and then like you could actually re-engage those things again, and that would be specifically like from a biblical perspective. But it could also be just, I mean, like going back and rereading our stories and then seeing the lesson that could be learned from that, and then like how is Jacob dealing with like making these wells, and then like what does that mean to us today? So I guess I don't know if any of that makes sense, but this is sort of
it's like kind of exactly the way I was thinking it, and I was thinking like so. I mean, I was just thinking because I'm a carpenter, so that's what I'm doing all the time. But and part of this is because I went to Bible school, and like basically I actually went to two different types of Bible school. One which was more like a internship program based in a big church, and the other one was a traditional college. And both of them leave their graduates severely underprepared to actually go and be a pastor of a church. And
but I'm just going to ask, I'm prepared to be a pastor of a church, or how about, are you at least prepared enough to embody what you learned? Like, let's say they're not a good leader. Are they coming out with quote unquote, like, is their toolkit upgraded?
It's in some areas, but very limited. So like in the internship kind of model, I would say the people there had a better understanding of like how to build a team and how to work with people. It was kind of like a discipleship model. So it was very much about like, you're going to spend time with me, and through that process, you'll become more godly, and then you can go spend time with, some kids and they'll become more godly. And that kind of worked. They just didn't have a lot. Like, I would say the things that were lacking there was their actual Bible study skills, which that's where the college survived well, but they didn't really have a lot of people skills. But then also they unless if they had the experience from like high school or something, just of like working a full-time job, like that's just basic life skill that like a lot of people don't have. So you can get that from anything that's difficult. But I mean, I think, building stuff, growing stuff, and dealing with people, relationships, like those are the main kind of categories of things that are given as examples of like experience in the Bible. Like Noah was a builder, and Moses, led building the tabernacle, and then once they're in the land, everybody's a farmer basically, or you're tending sheep, and then it's all about the relationships that people have, husbands, fathers, sons, so if you don't have experience like with healthy, good versions of like any of that stuff, well, then you're going to have a meaning crisis. So,
so the way I think about it, Michael, I just want to, I want to add a little framing. The way I think about it is what you seem to be doing, which I very much agree with, is you're adding framing to action. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the opposite move of postmodernism. Postmodernists carve things up kind of randomly. They think it's not random, it's random. They carve things up randomly, and then you break an important connection that you didn't know about because you're a Muppet like everybody else. And who knows what's important? We don't know. Right. And then you're trying to re-enchant, right, or reinflate or whatever. No, this action that you're doing, this participation, this participatory knowledge, to use some fancy Vervaeke words, is embedded within this tradition over thousands of years. And so you're putting the words, the proposition type learning, back together with the framing of the biblical biblical structures, right? And that, to me, that allows for the re-enchantment, because it's not like everybody's talking about relationships. It was one of the things somebody mentioned, the D.C. Schindler talk that Vervaeke did with Ken Lowry, and I just finished it today. It's freaking excellent. But one of the things they're missing is they're talking about attachment style, and they're not talking about what you're attached in and what the attachment is for, right? So they're talking about the relationship and pointing at that as an object, which I very much disagree with. They're not really talking about what's the participation and where are you participating and what are you participating to do, right? Because roughly speaking, in a religious frame, that would be to manifest the glory of God or something along those lines, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have that sense because we've divorced education from participation, made it purely propositional or mostly propositional. I have a video on that on my channel, Navigating Patterns, just saying education versus training, right? But what we need to do is re-inflate that or re-enchant it and put the framing that's worked for us for thousands of years without the proposition back into the proposition.
So you said a key word there, which is enchantment. I forgot who this person is. She spoke to Jordan Peterson. She spoke to a few other people about enchantment theory. And she had this.
Yeah, is that Chloe Valdry?
Maybe. And it was really, if I recall correctly, she had this conversation about if she could get liberal, like progressives and Republicans, she had them, like you could get them in a club and you could get them dancing first. And then like an hour in, you're like, okay, let's have this conversation. It'd be too late. Like they've been enchanted into like, we've been already dancing together one-on-one, our body, like our heart rate sort of connected. And this also relates to stories. I think a study just found out that if you are reading a story, and like it could be a crowd of 10,000 people, it could even be people not in the same room, their heartbeats sync as a story now, which is crazy. Now obviously that could be manipulated very well, but like it's sort of a deeper level that you sort of got to get like past like sort of classic cognition into like this like embodied place where then like it's hard to sort of escape that in a certain extent, which relates, Michael, and this also relates to what Mark is saying about like, how do we actually do that? How are you actually doing this embodiment? Or you were saying you have this tradition that these values are like, are embedded inside. So in Jewish thought, you have two schools of thought in the Talmud, which there's the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai. And a school of Shammai was always more strict, and a school of Hillel was always more lenient. And ultimately, the school of thought of Hillel was saying that you should be taking the mundane and be sanctifying it. And the school of Shammai was nervous that you're going to be taking holy and basically downgrading it. And an example of this would be that according to the school of Hillel, one could wear his phylacteries and take them into the restroom. And according to the school of Shammai, they'd be like, absolutely not. How can you take such a divine thing into that kind of room? Now, the heavenly spirit in the Talmud comes out, says like, that we will always go according to Rav Hillel. And that's sort of what was decreed, what was decided. However, on the ground, the way we live our life is very much in Judaism is very much like the school of Shammai. Even though he lost, we still do not embody it fully because there's this fear of I'm taking the sacred and I'm downgrading it. The question is, and this relates to Michael, is do you want to also be creating like, it's not like there doesn't have to be that separation, whether it like flows all the way through and like you are just constantly sanctifying what you're doing and not, there's no version of you like downgrading it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a part of the there's this tendency with like time and tradition to always make more and more things sacred, and then it becomes like unwieldy a little bit. Like like because I come from like a very simple church background. I'm not Orthodox, I'm not Catholic, but like they have like all this traditional stuff, and like they have the cathedrals and the icons and the statues and all this like tradition, and if something's it gets like unwieldy a little bit too much. And I think that there is obviously there is some value in that sacredness, but it goes too far to where you get to that place where you don't know like what can I question, like you don't, where you, if it's really easy for you to inadvertently do something wrong without knowing, that's not a good system, because if you need to have years and years and years of education about what you can't do before there's no room left for the freedom for you to like learn or experience anything. So I do remember hearing that Jesus, I think they said Jesus on most of his decisions, he was like 80% of the time he was siding with Rabbi Hillel, but so it wasn't the same, and so he supported the he did have that balance. He did have both sides, but it was very heavily on the favor of spiritualizing the mundane, I guess you could say, or I like to think about it as like redeeming it. We're redeeming these things and making them sacred again. So
I like this idea of, let's say, the school, and because the last few conversations we had, which I don't want to dive deep into them about, like, what are we doing? What's this meaning? I was sort of feeling like this urge of like, let's move forward. Let's not talk about like, about like, where is this going, but try to actually move towards something, right? So I hear about the school, and obviously that sounds interesting. I also hear about Chad, and this relates to you, but you had your little, and not little, it's 22 minutes, but you had this little documentary you did about this little corner of the internet.
Yeah.
And it ends with, come play, I think, or let's play. Yeah. And it made me think about, just like in Proverbs, how like in Proverbs 119, there's like 8 different verses that talk about playing. I mean, I think the translation in English is delight, but in Hebrew it's playing. And I was also wondering how maybe there's something to that about like a playfulness that is also very enticing in a certain way to people, and how that could be utilized properly. I'm not sure how, but I just think like there's something about that word when you said come play, which was like a lot more inviting than, let's say, I don't know. I just think I've never been to an Esrei, but when I think of Esrei, I don't think like come play.
Well, okay, so I can't talk real long. I'll just say real quick. A lot of the come play and the ideas around my channel and the things I noticed, like guys like Grizz doing and Chris and even Michael does this. There's a play aspect, which is gives me a lot of like childlike faith. There's something that can happen when things become too rigid. If you guys have not seen the latest conversation that Karen Wong had with Ulysses, go to the meaning code and watch that conversation. You can see what happens to somebody who is caught in something that's too rigid, and it's heartbreaking. And it's also I think I've seen some of that in my own life. But he talks about being born into a family that recently moves into I think it was Jehovah's Witness, and so he they didn't have holidays and stuff, and he even started getting into music, and he got really great at it, and he was in his 20s, and they wanted him to give up his music. And it's like, so there's things that's why play is important, and play isn't everything, but it is a major component to this collective sense making. That's like when we were kids and we were out there playing whatever it was, cops and robbers or whatever it was. There was something to that where we're not really focused on the facts about our play. We're in the play, and we're allowing for the play to move further and further. And if things get a little outside of the unnamed rules, like kind of in the Piagetian way, then we say, "Oh, we're doing this." And so, but I think play is huge. I know for me, when I'm caught in the grips of rigid ideological action or belief, and I'm unwilling to move outside of that, it feels like death. And I think so. Like you started the stream with stories about Isaac and Abraham, and I was thinking about Job, and I'm thinking about Christ, and I'm thinking about all these different characters. And what's happening is God's constantly breaking our rigid vision, and saying, and this is kind of like the rumination thing that Matthew Peugeot is talking about. It's like rumination can be a form of play too, in a sense. I think so. I'd love to talk more, but I have to clean up the kitchen. But I'm looking forward to listening to this tomorrow. So see you guys.
See ya.
Yeah, I'm glad Chad brought in play, because it's an important part of what Jordan Peterson talks about, and it's an important part of what John Vervaeke talks about, right? And I think to some extent, when you're stuck in the materialist frame, right? So that, you know, my thesis is still the intimacy crisis, and I've got a video with Andrew with the Bangs on her channel with that, and one on my channel, Navigating Bad with Catherine, right? When you're stuck in the intimacy crisis, which I think causes the meaning crisis, you're having this material relationship with the world. And the thing about material is that material is rigid. That's like what it is, right? Ideas are not rigid. You can't grab them. And that's part of what Vervaeke talks about. He says, well, look, E equals MC squared is real, but I can't give it to you. I can't flip it around, right? I can't manipulate it the way I manipulate the physical world, the material world, right? And so he's trying to re-enchant to some extent. And this is another great part of his work. He's trying to re-enchant the world, right, by using that formula. So what is the space? What is the difference? Well, there's a space of play. There's a space where you can experiment, and you're not expected to have a known perfect result up front, right? And we've lost that, right? We lost that because we want certainty. But you can have one or the other. You can't have both. Like you can't learn unless you can play. Learning and playing are actually the same thing. And we go, no, we've got learning down. We just give you a grade. We give you the books, you read the books, you get the grade. But that doesn't actually work, because then we tell a bunch of people they're smarter than they really are, like Sam Harris.
I think you also see that in, I think, hey Manuel, we're glad you joined. I think you also see this in when, like you just said, like children could watch the same show or the same movie again and again and again, right? And an adult, aside from music, which managed to pierce its way through, we cannot handle like, I saw this. I don't need to see this again. Like I know this, and there's something, and this again relates to the play. There's something that's like more instinctual about it that allows them to like fully engage. And I think like most people growing up, whether it's like Beauty and the Beast or let's say The Prince of Egypt, they're like, yeah, we're down to watch it all. And at a certain age, we're like, no. But the religious stuff, that's like serious. And like then as that goes on, there's something about it that like someone could take it seriously, but it starts becoming less instinctual. And I can't hear the story again about Jonah, like quote unquote, like I can't hear this anymore. But I mean, obviously in this corner, we talk, they've been talking about Job. Jess has been talking about Job, I think, like for 15 years or something like that, right? So like, so
right. Well, but play. Yeah, Vervaeke sort of squares that circle too, right? Because he talks about there's a way in which you can engage certain books, and every time you read them, you get more out of them. They're like wells, right? And then there are books that aren't like that, like technical manuals are not like that, right? You can refer to them, right? But maybe if you read them again, there's no depth there. And I think it's that depth, that's that verticality that everybody's finally gotten to. I was like, you guys took too long to get there, but that's the important missing part. That's the enchantment.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know though. The technical manuals, maybe they would surprise us, because that's because as I've been kind of working on this project, I've been looking a little bit more at like, and I know Hezi, I'm sure, is aware, like there's been a lot of thought about the detailed instructions that God gives about how to build the tabernacle, and you would think this is like, oh, this is just the stuff that the people that needed to build the tabernacle needed to know, but it's like, well, no, there's actually a lot of really interesting stuff in there, and stuff that we probably can learn things from. So I mean, I don't know, even the technical manuals might be worth there might be more to them than
well, no, but John makes this point. It's what it's aimed at, right? Okay. So in other words, if you're aiming at writing a fictional story about a particular incident to make some money because you're an author, right, that's different from Plato's Republic, which is also a fictional story, right? And so if you have a manual that's aimed at not teaching you, quote, how to build a tabernacle, but how you build a tabernacle to the highest value or virtue or conception, that's a whole different manual from how do I run my microwave. Like my microwave manual has no depth, and it's not supposed to, and it shouldn't. Like I'm not denigrating these things. We need them, but they fall into two broad classes here. And one of them is this verticality, this important depth. And the other one is the way in which they're shallow and utilitarian. And we're very much a utilitarian society as materialists. And it's that materialism, that individualism, that objectivism that is snuck in. And it's snuck into the churches too. And that's actually really important. Because if you blame modernity, you think, oh, I'll go to an Orthodox church and the problem will be solved. But if it's materialism that's the problem, or individualism or objectivism that's the problem, that's also in the church. So, fighting modernity doesn't work because you're fighting the wrong monster at that point.
Do you feel, Michael, like how much of, and again, I understand that some of this could be like conceptual, but in this school, how much of it do you see it being sort of individual work, and how much is it via group? Because I feel like the more it's sort of obviously one needs his time to really take it all in. However, I do think you really get the most amount of perspectives, and if you're doing it via group.
So I mean, it obviously depends on how many people are available there, but like my kind of thinking was, maybe it would be something like everybody gets together in the morning, however many people there are, maybe there's like a half a dozen students or so, and maybe have some kind of a lesson, and then go work for the day, maybe everybody's working spread out, or in pairs of two, or with different teachers or whatever, and have some time to kind of think about it on their own, and then you can get back together and kind of discuss how that day's work helped you process the lesson from the morning, or something like that, or the day before, something like that. Because but also thinking that, like, part of this would be because I'm trying to use all of the undervalued resources, and one of them was thinking, like, hey, there's a lot of, like, people that are experienced businessmen working in the trades, who are godly men. They don't get a lot of opportunity in church to be teaching or whatever. Maybe their pastor doesn't say, like, oh, would you like, or maybe they don't feel comfortable, like, running a group or something. But that's the guy he also needs to learn this, because he can grasp it quicker, because he's a mature believer, and then he can help translate it to the students that he's teaching. So simultaneously through the day, he's teaching both how we do the job and how the Bible applies to that, or so that was kind of part of the idea too. So I mean, yeah, I think it's good to have all those things, some time by yourself, some time with just somebody who's more experienced with you, some time to work things out with your peers. All those are valuable. So,
well, and that's ultimately what we're missing, right? Is the framing for our work.
Yeah.
Like, this is part of the meaning crisis, right? People find their work meaningless. Why do you find your work meaningless? Like, work is so enriching and fulfilling. I'm like, how did you even get there? Like, what happened? What happened to you? Where's the boo-boo, right? Like, but what happened is they lost their worldview frame. And so they look at work as an isolated postmodern thing. Well, I'm working, and it's just work, and it's not connected to anything else. It's like, yeah, but work is the thing that allows you to go on vacation. Literally, you can't have an enjoyable vacation if you're on vacation all the time. Right? It doesn't happen. Right? Work is the thing that enables you to do a bunch of other things that you like, and enables you to appreciate them through the contrast of the work. And there's more. I could go on, right? But because it's not embedded in anything, just postmodernly sort of cut it out, then there's no there's no connection. I disagree with Shari. No, there's no such thing as a bullshit job.
So one second. I want to understand what she's saying over here. Shari, obviously, you're welcome to let us know about, like, so Mark is saying there's no such thing as a bullshit job. So you mean, like, as long as, like, you're proud of what you're doing, and obviously assuming that it's a productive job, or you're saying, like, anything goes. No.
You need work. You, as a human, as a person, persons need work. They need work. It's not an optional thing. It's not an optional thing. And therefore, there cannot be work that doesn't connect to the rest of life. There can be people who can't connect their work to the rest of life.
So let's frame
this. Is false.
I would say we have, I'm not going to say that word because of my guest here, but I would say that we do have more jobs that are like that now than we probably ever had in the past. This one wasn't even that bad, but, like, I worked at a call center, and I had asked people to send back their DirecTV boxes all day long. And, like, it was basically, like, 90% of the time it was just leaving the same voicemail over and over again. And I mean, I was reading a book while I was doing
that. That's important. But that's important, because if it doesn't happen, things are worse.
No, I agree. It is important, but I'm saying it's a much bigger stretch to. It's a much bigger stretch to find how what you are doing is important and why it matters that it's you.
Of course,
and it's
and that depends on whether or not you're a materialist. If you're a materialist, a job like that seems pointless. But if you're not a materialist, then the job is connected to the rest of your life. In other words, you can't put it in the chain of materiality and say, well, my calls are only 1% effective, and therefore I could spend my time better doing something else as part of this company or as part of the economy. You can do that, but that's a materialist brain.
Let's frame this with UBI for a second, right? So, like, comes Andrew Yang and says, like, we're giving out the money, right? And I know people looked at this as a stimulus check, but some pushback was like, listen, you're going to give people X money. And then arguably, right, this job Michael's talking about, right? It's not the surgeon, but it's this job that Michael's talking about. This guy's going to be like, forget that, right? I'm home right now. Now, in that case, you're right. It falls inside the materialist framework where he's like, I don't need this anymore to give me the money. So I'm done with that. Now, the issue is what arguably many people are fearful from, like, there would be then, they see that as the beginning of the meaning crisis, right? Then people wouldn't have what to do. And what are people going to do? So now Michael, and I guess I understand Mark's point, because he's saying, like, without that, like, that sort of in a certain way get that really gives you, it is important. And even though it's a small cog, it's still creating, like, a difference. Now, with regards to what Michael's saying, he's saying, yes, but let's say that guy didn't have to do that job. Obviously, he'd rather do, those jobs could be very mundane. And arguably, not everyone, while you could say every job potentially is important, not everyone could see the value in the job, even if they really want to.
Right.
Like Michael, I'm sure, really tried to.
It depends where you're looking for the value. If you're looking for the value in materiality, you're screwed. You're done. All jobs are meaningless. All jobs are BS. All of them.
I'm not looking for material. Okay,
no, but I'm saying this is where the meaning crisis comes in. And look, we saw this with COVID. Like, a bunch of people are now unemployed and they're unhappy. And people, the simple things that people don't understand. Like, one of them is, and I know this because I've been consulting for years. One of them is the amount of money you have when you're working, okay, is insufficient for your needs when you're not working. Because you have to keep yourself busy, and that ends up costing money. And so you say, look, we're just going to give you, let's say you make $800 a week, and we're going to give you $1,200 a week. That's not going to be sufficient for you if you stop working 40 hours. It's not going to be sufficient anymore. It's not going to keep you busy enough. Most people, not everybody, but almost everybody. It's not going to keep them busy anymore because now they need to spend more money in order to feel like they're doing something, because people do things in the world.
Yeah, but you would agree that if all jobs could be equal, not all jobs are. Again, you have to have a very good match then between the person doing the job, right, and like how captivating the job is, how much he could be handling that. Because how are you infusing meaning into what Michael is doing?
Well, you can't relate the meaning to the other material things. You can't say
no material things.
I'm a car, right? Well, the meaning is what it gives you in your life and how it affects you and your relationship with all the things around you, not how it affects the company you work for.
No company, forget the company. How it affects me. My point is, Michael could be like, listening, I'm stamping tickets, and like the meaning it's giving me, like I get it that it's very important that now these people could take their library books, and now I'll take a different example. I build homes, okay? It's very difficult for me because I feel like that my job is very materialistic, right? These are staircases, these are your faucets. Now I have to yes, it keeps the lights on and gets my kids his fancy shoes, and it answers that, okay? And some of that I used to be like, okay, I could go to dinner with my wife, and now that allows me to take something that allows me to have some meaning using those material tools to get that meaning. However, I would like to go to work every day, aside from knowing that like I build my own business and it's successful, like I'm doing amazing work. Right now, if I'm a club bouncer, can I tell myself I'm doing amazing work? And what you're saying, Mark, is like, yes, it's still meaningful.
Or if you're a house mover, can you do amazing work and it's still be meaningful?
The answer,
or a delivery person, Casey. Imagine being a delivery person stuck in a truck all the time, Casey. How meaningless would that be? And you've upgraded from delivery person, right, to mover. But yeah, I mean, you're doing fine, right? So you're not in a meaning crisis.
It's about, I think you've said this before, maybe containers, right? Your things it's nested. Your job is nested in your neighborhood, even your street, your little town if you're in a little town like me, or your neighborhood if you're in a big city, and then the city itself and your country and everything else. It's
hard to see the impact. When you're saying a small city, I could easily say how like I sense the meaning because I could see it. I could see its effects. If I'm a programmer in the middle of Bangladesh, you know what I mean? Can I feel it outside this room when I have some woman yelling at me in Iowa on the phone while I'm trying to like upgrade her, her internet?
Yeah, but what about all those people that volunteer for like helping marathons and stuff, and they're glorified traffic cops?
Where are you at, Manuel? You're saying what about them? As in, like, are you asking?
Well, they're volunteering to do that, right? Like that, they're not getting paid. Like they're one level away, and they're glorified traffic cops.
Or they're handing out cups of water, or they're just saying, "Here you go," and completely banal things, literally banal things. Right?
Can everyone get to their state though? Like I understand that they see meaning at it, and like you said, they're clearly volunteering.
Right? It's not. Yeah, but it's not seeing meaning. See, this is part of the problem. People are like, meaning is not something in your backyard that's hidden under a rock that you can go find. It's not. We co-create or co-manifest meaning, and this is where the confusion is. That's up to us, and this is what I'm saying. Is
can everyone do that?
Everything you do can be connected meaningfully, but that's up to you.
No, I think the volunteer
can do it.
The volunteering thing that gives people a sense of meaning because they're being approached from, we need you to do this. So like it gives that's meaning, like they're necessary. Like, I mean, to some extent, I mean, I say this in the sense of like, this is why it's kind of shocking how much meaning some of these people seem to derive from these particularly useless tasks. But
it's not shocking at all.
No, it's not. But
they have the meaning. The meaning comes first to them.
If you get paid for something, right? Then isn't that someone saying, I want you to do that? Like isn't that literally what that means?
Yeah, but okay. So let me put it the way that I'm thinking. So I have started to think that meaning crisis is sort of a luxury belief that you get because you've arrived at a place that society or other people have told you is supposed to be a good place to be, and then you found that it is not. Which is why it's a luxury to have a meaning crisis, because you have success. If you are starving or like on the run or in some it's actually interesting. They say like whenever like war is happening like in a country or conflict, like mental health goes way up because all of a sudden like people clearly see like the necessity of doing basic important things to life, and then they don't have the time to sit around and say like, what is the meaning of all this? But I think what precedes the meaning crisis is more of a purpose crisis, in that people don't even know like why their life should be on a certain directory. And that's even why like poor people, I don't think have as much of a meaning crisis, because they have this idea that becoming more wealthy will be the answer. But because it's always in the future, it's a goal they work towards. So they're perpetually like feeling like they're making progress or something. But if they arrive at that point, like people that win the lottery, like those people have terrible lives because they've suddenly achieved the thing that they always thought would make their life meaningful, and surprise, surprise, it doesn't. So
Right, because they're looking for meaning. They're trying to have meaning instead of trying to co-create meaning. And so when you misapprehend what meaning is and how to interact with it, you're going to run into that problem. And like I said, this is a framing problem. And that's part of the issue. And look, when John Vervaeke talks about this, he says they feel like their jobs are less meaningful. He doesn't say that they're BS jobs, right? He says they feel like their jobs are less, right, because meaning is something that you co-create or co-manifest in the world. And that's the thing. Like the outcome doesn't matter to the person doing the work because they're connecting it to something outside of themselves and not inside of the world.
But the job is a vehicle, and just connecting to what Michael was saying, arguably, right, up until like the Industrial Revolution, everyone was just surviving. And then like, work was just because I got to work. I mean, I'm thinking to myself, Mark, there's a farmer wakes up in the morning, right? Is his son going outside and just like chilling, looking at the stars, being like, I don't know if I'm ready to work now, Dad? Or is he gonna be like, well, we need to work because that's what we do.
But some of them are, right, and poor people become nihilistic and hit a meaning crisis too. You can argue that it's less of a problem for them, yeah. And look, you can measure some of these effects, right, psychologically. But I got to tell you, those numbers aren't very impressive because it's not like everybody, right? It's a lot of people in a war do not get a heightened sense. I mean, those that do, and that's great. And they were in meaning crisis before, and now they have nationalism, right, to help them orient or give them a frame in which to relate. And this is what it is. Like, there's a frame in which I can relate, right? And that's the thing that helps. And when you lose that frame, let's suppose you're postmodern and you just cut that frame out. When you lose that frame, now you can't relate. Now there's no way to co-create meaning anymore. So that's really what the problem is. And that, to me, is preceded by the intimacy crisis. Like when we can't make deep connections with others and with nature and with ourselves, and possibly with God, if you want to use 4 frames instead of 3, then we have a problem. And the problem that we have, roughly speaking, is that because there's no stable space for us to transform within. We cannot become the kind of creature that we need to become. We get stuck at a certain point, and then we stop making progress forward. And this is why Jordan Peterson says things like, it's amazing how little encouragement people need. And I took that very seriously. So I started giving people a little bit of encouragement. I cannot tell you how much of a change that's made for a bunch of people. And they've told me, no, that was really helpful, like really, really helpful. And I've seen them turn around because of it.
How important is it then, and this relates to Michael when we're talking about having it as individuals or as a group, that, and Nechama mentioned the point over here about like, it's literally how we create sanity together, right? Like, if you're creating this meaning. So now it's clearly, when you're saying good jobs, then arguably doing a job alone is a lot more difficult.
Yeah, it can be for some people. Some people like working alone. Like I actually don't like working with other people on average.
No,
like
but then are you framing?
So it's not that easy. It's not a one-to-one answer. I mean, this is the materialist problem. Materialists look for certainty. They look for 100% answers, and it's relational. Like it's all relational. Luke Thompson would say it's the personal, and I think he carries that a little too far. But he's right. It's about you to the things, and it's not thing. It's things, and this is where we mess up. We want this singular sort of discrete linear relationship. That the talk with John Vervaeke and DC Schindler and Ken Lowry was great because they actually touched on some of this. Although of course I have many objections to their overly complicated framing, but they touch on this, right? They touch on this discrete linear sort of trappedness, right? This propositional procedural way of thinking that prevents proper meaning making.
Well, that's, to me, in a certain way, the Tower of Babel, where you have.
It's the same story. Absolutely, yeah, sure. If you want to go all theological on me, which I just want
to sprinkle a little.
No, but you should. No, that was perfect. That was perfect. What you did was great, right? I can't play, but that was great. It is the Tower of Babel. You're right about that. And I want to link it back to Vervaeke's language. So that was really good.
The term they use in Hebrew, it's safachat dvarim achadim, one language, and the things were one, basically. And you can clearly see that, like you were saying, those linear lines are pulling that. You're going to lose your meaning. And arguably, the Tower of Babel itself isn't. I think the intention is not wrong. It's how it's oriented. And like, arguably, you could say, like, even the meaning crisis, you are looking to build a coherent Tower of Babel. Maybe the name would be different, but you do want to orient and build a structure, quote unquote, together. However, you want to be doing that.
I don't think you want to build a structure. I think that's part of the problem is people want to build a structure because they're materialists, and I don't want to build a structure together.
Well, didn't
have
you guys say we need a structure?
No, we do, but I want to have many structures. See, this is where the argument comes in. Right?
Sure, but then many structures could still be one large structure.
But I don't think they can, and I don't think they have to be. But this is actually where the argument came in, right? So you have a bunch of people who have a thing, right? And they deny they have a thing, but whatever, they clearly have a thing. You're not defending something you don't have. So they have a thing, and they're like, Jacob's like, well, I want to do this different thing. I want to create this different thing. I want to be explicit about the structure. I want to be explicit about the things that we need to do the thing that I want to do at scale, because scale changes everything. The thing that you can do with 10 people, you can't do with 1,000 people. Just that's the way the world is laid out, right? And so what ends up happening is, Jacob says, I want to do this differently, and everybody over here pretends like they're being attacked, when in fact he's just saying, no, I want to go off on my own and do this. I'm not saying don't do what you're doing. I'm not trying to change you. I'm just want to do this.
I was muted. The problem is, and according to Grizz, anytime I say the problem is, you have to take a drink. So take a drink. That more than anything as human beings, we want to know where we fit in. And for many, many years, unfortunately, our society has been convinced by Jean-Jacques Rousseau that everywhere man was born free, and yet everywhere he is in chains. Because there is this idea that we are somehow free and we are born somehow perfect, and it's society or something that corrupts us. And if we were to get rid of this corrupting influence, suddenly everything would be perfect. And this is a silly idea. Jordan Peterson, to some extent, related this to the story of the Exodus and the idea that you escape the tyranny of Egypt. You could say the tyranny of the Trinity as well. And then you come into the promised land. And the fact is, you don't come into the promised land when you escape tyranny. You come into the desert. You come into having no structure, and so you escape the Chavle Barzel, the iron prison that is Egypt, that is the narrowness, the straits. Min hametzar karatika anani bemerchavya. I called to God from the straits, and he answered me from the broadness. And so, especially since the 60s, our society has tried very much to remove boundaries, to remove structure, to remove tyranny. And what we find when all these boundaries and limitations are removed is misery. And so we need a new form of structure, a structure that isn't tyrannical, a structure that is not like sin, that is godly. And that godly structure is what we are missing in our lives. And I think Mark does have it partially correct in that it cannot be a single structure, right? In fact, it has to be many hierarchies in one organization, in one body. And that's why, for example, you have Moses and you have Aaron and you have Miriam and you have everybody else, right? I think this is where Christianity goes most wrong, is this idea of the perfect story, right? The life of Jesus and Jesus as perfection is idolatry, because there is no perfect story. There is no perfect life. There is no one book of the Bible that's the perfect book. And I think, I say that the seeds of Christianity's, who said it? Somebody said to me, there's nothing wrong with Christianity that cannot be solved by what is right with Christianity. So everybody's looking for the one version of the Gospels, and there are 4 versions of the Gospels. Because if you were to reduce Jesus to the life of one man, you would, in fact, destroy its value, I think. And yeah, what we need is people who are successful in our structures to help uplift those who are unsuccessful in our structures, rather than dismantling the structures altogether. I think it's beyond that. If there is a well-structured hierarchy, right? And that's what I mean by Jacob's ladder. That hierarchy gives clear direction to your orientation, to how you can move up and move down. And ultimately, there is this freedom, but it is a freedom given by God. In Deuteronomy 30, he says, I have set before you life and death, good and evil. Choose life, right? And that is a choice that you have. But first and foremost, it has to be there before you. And I think the people who are dying of the misery of the meaning crisis, it's because they don't even have that in front of them, that choice, right? That capacity to choose between good and evil, life and death. So, yeah. So that is the problem, and that is what the conversation, I think, was getting at. I think was getting at it pretty well.
This way, and if you want to do this way with me, please come and join me, that's why I supported all of those streams, the ones that I caught, because I thought that was actually an important message. So, right, and this is, maybe this is a good way to fight that, Platonic tendency that we'll say Vervaeke has, is to point out, well, we have a story of what happens when you make everything into the one, John. It's called the Tower of Babel. And I didn't know that about Hebrew, so that was super helpful. Thank you for that, because that gives new tools in the toolbox for sure, right? So if it really is combine everything into one, that is the sin, if you want to put it that way, of the Neoplatonic outline that people are using, whether they made that mistake or not.
But can't it be then that, let's say, that Michael has his mini tower, and you have your mini tower, and Jacob has his mini tower. So I'm with you, but aren't they orienting towards the same place?
Well, see, that's the key. The key is what are you oriented towards, right? Because you have to be oriented towards something. You can imagine there's 3 positions, right? This position number 1 is oriented towards the bad or evil, right? I should use evil because that's more precise. That's on the vertical. Good and bad are on the horizontal. Good and evil are on the vertical, right? So you can be oriented towards evil. You can be oriented in the middle, neutrally, because most of the stuff we do is neutral. Like making dinner and all those things, not that they don't have an ethical component, but most of the components of those things are of neutral valence with respect to the vertical, with respect to good and evil, right? But in order to orient towards the good, you actually have to put a lot more effort into that. And if you put no effort at all, you're more likely to fall into the broad base of evil, right? And that's what happened to Sam Harris, right? He doesn't have a sense of good and evil. He just says, you need to move away from the worst possible evil and you'll do good, which is total obvious nonsense. And he proved it with TriggerPod, right? So no, that's not a way to understand the good. The good has to be a star in the sky to sort of bring in some Peterson, right? That you move towards, that you struggle towards. It has to be. And so in that way, how you do that and what structures you use may be unique to you or the group of people like you. And that's okay. And I would say that the want to build structure and work within a hierarchy is the least Protestant thing ever, right? Because Protestants, that's what they're objecting to. They're saying, we don't need anybody between us and God because we have the Bible and that's all we need. And so like they're like the party of anarchy or something, for sure. I mean, very obviously. And I don't say that as a slur. I mean, I think Jacob's conception is dead on. Like somebody's got to spread out into the new space and discover new territory. There you go. I mean, that's valid, necessary, required, and good. Right. But it can also go too far. And that's when you object to other people's structures. It's like if somebody else wants to build something because they need it to work at scale, why not let them? Like, why are you interfering with them? Because then you're being tyrannical, not them. They haven't even started it yet. Like, how can you be tyrannical before you have the thing to be tyrannical with? That makes no sense.
Casey, what do you think?
Well, since I'm Catholic, it's more obvious to me that you have to submit to a hierarchy, regardless of how to be nice, questionable the hierarchy may be at some times, right? But that's always there. Like if you're in the synagogue, right, and the rabbi is talking about scripture, you don't just sit there and quietly listen and accept everything, right? People will stand up and shout their disagreements, and sometimes a lot of times it's needed. So you don't just randomly shout disagreements to your higher ups without having some sort of purpose in mind towards like this needs to be fixed or this is misunderstood. And but you still submit to the hierarchy, and you're going to no matter what. There is a hierarchy that will be submitted to by you. So,
Manuel, what are you thinking? Did he bust out? He ran away?
No, I don't run.
Yeah, I think John is wrong. John makes a lot of mistakes in his life, in his book. Many mistakes.
calmly walking back confidently to share his thoughts with us.
So, yeah, like I think one of the things that I struggled with, and I guess that's the Protestant vein in me, it's like I was willing to go to church and say, well, I'll submit, right? Which is effectively participate contingently. Is that a good framing? Anyway, but there's a surrender aspect as well, right? Because what does surrender mean? Is like you give the authority over to a higher authority. That's what surrender means. So now you're a subject of that authority, and if you want to submit, like that is a part of it, right? And that's scary, right? And obviously that cannot go infinite, right? Because if you surrender into infinity, then you're just a puppet, right? And so that is a hard balance, and it's really easy to say, well, I'm just going to be safe, and I'm going to go and walk on one side of that line, and I'll never get trapped, right? I'll never make that mistake. But when you do that, you lock yourself out of types of participation, right? Like one of them would be like marriage, right? Like you can't have a successful marriage if you don't conform to it, right? And the conformation is the marriage decides who I am. Like that's like you have surrendered yourself to the marriage, and it's like this is really rough for people, right? Because like it's even more rough than finding meaning in some sense, and I think it's the prerequisite for finding meaning, right? Because the surrendering gives you at least a standard to judge yourself and how you're doing, because now you are being valued by your participation in this higher thing.
Just to ask Manuel, when you say, it's a two-part question. One is when you're saying, I think this is before the meaning crisis, do you specifically talking about like submitting to marriage, or are you saying submitting to something? Because if it's submitting to marriage, that sort of relates to what Mark is saying about the intimacy crisis in a certain sense. And secondly, just about what you said about sort of submitting to that, and that what, the marriage is going to conform you. My brother told me when I got married, he spoke at one of the meals we were having, and he said, my wife's name is Jenny. And he said, there's no more Chezi and there's no more Jenny. Now there's Jenny Chezi, and it's a new entity that which sort of relates to what you're saying. That new entity is on top of both of us. And just to bring it back to a religious context, that's sort of us again, like taking two and trying to create one again. I mean, whether it's creating a child or creating a person, and whether it's also conforming to this unity or this new entity we built. So Manuel, please go ahead. If you were specifically talking about like conforming in general or conforming to a relationship.
Well, so if you're in a materialist frame, I think marriage is as close as you can get, right? Because there's a distinction between the one-on-one, right? We were talking about intimacy, right?
Yeah.
Like it's easier to develop intimacy in a marriage than develop intimacy in your workplace, right? But you are surrendered, right? Like you're like to your work. Like it's like, oh, I'm gonna get up at this time because like I'm expected to be here, and like I'm gonna like bust traffic laws which I ethically shouldn't bust in order to get at work in time, right? So and so one of the things that I realized when going to church, right? Like there's a lot of these things in the Bible that relate to the hierarchical relationship, like honoring, reverence, all of that stuff, right? And cultivating a participatory understanding of that stuff, right? Like how often are you in front of the king, right? Well, you're not. Like, but you need to know what to do when you're in front of the king, right? And in some sense, everybody's a mini king in some frame, right?
It's very deep what you just said. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
So we need to cultivate the relationship to these things. Like we need to, in order to have a proper society. And if you look at how they do it in the Eastern societies, right, where they have the social dimension effectively fulfill the role of God, right? Like that's an honor culture, right? They have these things fixed socially way better than we have in the West with our stupid individuals, right? And like I was in church today, and there was this thing. It's like everybody's unique, right? Like they have their unique way of relating to God. They have a unique way of serving God, right? Like that's good, right? But that uniqueness needs to come together in God, right? And so if you're in a materialist frame, right, serving marriage as your life goal can get you far, but like you'll end up in a midlife crisis, right? Because your kids go out of your house or whatever, right? And now there's the structure that your meaning making relied upon that's falling apart. And now what do you do? Well, you'll travel, right? You'll keep yourself busy with busy. And like, yeah, maybe that works for you, but like it's gonna eat it.
Well, and I want to bring in, so chapter 10 of Beyond Order by Jordan Peterson actually covers this. It's something that we, that Manuel and I this is how we got to containers, right? So we sort of discovered this. The easiest way to think about it is there's a container called the relationship or the marriage or whatever, right? And that is the place that you go to get intimate. Like the intimacy, the relationship, the attachment, whatever you want to call it, has to have a space in which it exists. That space is not arbitrary as postmodernism would have you believe, because that actually is what postmodernism is. It's all frames are arbitrary. It doesn't matter how you frame the book. All those frames are perfectly equally valid. That's a lie. It's wrong. It's flat out incorrect. And also the flattening of the world causes us to think of it as, well, there's Hezi Jenny all of a sudden, or Jenny Hezi, right? Whatever, right? But actually what there is there's this relationship, this container called the relationship, and this star at the top of that you're both pointing towards. And I like when, I don't know, Peugeot talks about it or somebody else, but they're saying, look, in orthodoxy, you're both moving closer to each other because you're both moving towards God. Right? And so it's a second order effect. In other words, you're not actually moving, you're not looking at the other person and taking a step towards them and they're taking a step towards you. You're both on a journey up to this higher ideal, right? Whether that could be the local container of just a relationship or the larger container of God. Yeah, they're the same thing.
This relates to Babel, though. This relates to, like Manuel has his channel, you have your channel.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I would say as long as you're orienting towards the same place, right? Like you said, we're not itching towards this, we're going up here. Right. But isn't that like, I guess the grand structure then?
No, I don't think it is. I think there's
what is that orientation towards?
Well, the fact that things have the same orientation and are going to the same place doesn't mean they're the same thing. It doesn't mean
they're not the same thing. That's fine.
Right.
This goes back to the Tower of Babel. We want multiplicity, but can you be united and have multiplicity? But
yes.
But doesn't, I guess I'm taking an example, and this might be a bad example, but let's say Burning Man. If you're inside of it, you're seeing like mayhem. But if you zoom out, you see like this beautiful, like circle that they built sort of around. He's in the middle. They're all spread out. So I'm sorry?
That's true for everything, right? Your perspective determines how you view it.
Yeah. I guess I'm connecting back to you, sort of back to our conversation, which is in the Bridge of the Meaning, there's like this fear of structure, or like there has to be rules. Like we're saying, you got to build a body. Right now, you're not saying there has to be one body and this is the only body, right? You're saying
we're not saying they have to participate. Like they're pretending like sure. Jacob doing his thing somehow impacts them, and that's not true. It's an insane assertion. Right?
We'll go to the Tower of Babel, right? I'm not asking you to build this hammer. I'm plastering. You don't have to plaster. You can go 4 floors up. They're working on plumbing. Don't even worry about the plaster. Right. My question is though, does the goal matter?
No, but there's a distinction between working on the foundation and building up.
Okay, expand. I understand there's a difference, but go on with that analogy.
So if you're getting people together and say, well,
I am going to stop the stream in about 15 minutes because half an hour after that is going to be Father Eric's stream, and I expect all of you to take a tiny break and then go over there. If you have not signed up for Father Eric's channel, you should do that.
We're here on the internet, right? And like I made a bunch of categories on the Discord server that I'm starting, and I'm still trying to work out what and how to do that stuff. But like I want to have cooperation, right? And I want to aim it at 3 things, right? So sense making, which is basically borrowing intelligence from other people, and then community, right? Which is having a way. Well, something that binds you effectively, right? And being bounded in, and therefore you're constrained so that you're not lost, right? And then thirdly, it's wisdom, right? And then the wisdom is the thing that allows them, it's like the navigation of participation, right? It's like the ethical understanding of when to do A and B and that there's a C, right? And that you could be participating in C if you changed who you were, right? Effectively, the step that people don't see. And then, like, we can do all the things of getting people back into society. But, like, I don't think you need to do that because at that point, they're capable of doing that by themselves.
So, and maybe I'm not understanding it correctly, but let's say I go inside, whatever the inside is, and I'm seeing these 3 items you just listed. I would say that sense making is sort of like is you need to get to wisdom, right? Like sort of like it's a connected step. But is the idea someone comes in, he does some sense making, he realizes he's part of a community, he emerges with wisdom, and then the idea isn't necessarily like build structure, it's good. Go back into society, and then
Right.
that continues out. And then the idea
Right.
would be like, not your community leader, you're just embodied good father, which means good husband, which means kids do well, which means, multiply by
Elite.
that whole community. Everyone loves, I don't know, Ohio, because everyone's embodied.
The
No,
family,
I-
the family gets bigger, but the house doesn't have to because people can go off and build their own house.
Right, and
There's no power babble problem at all.
And I would argue that you have a responsibility to the thing that raised you, right? So if the internet is your parent, then maybe you should give back to that parent in some sense. And like not everybody has to, right? But some people have to, because else it disappears, right? And I think that's the thing in AA, right? There's this commitment to the thing, and that's also what the church should be, hopefully is that you make that commitment, right? So that you sow those fields for the next generation.
But this also stresses why I think, I would say Jacob, but let's say you guys, it's by you guys, I mean, let's say Mark and Manuel, since I discussed it with you, why it's so important, for example, that some voices are heard more and some voices are heard less, because if I'm trying, where I'm mining for sense making and wisdom, right? Like I can't be, I want to see the signal in the noise. And if I'm promoting too much noise, and by noise, I don't mean that it's bad, it's just mean that's not the signal I'm listening to,
Right.
That is going to get in the way. And arguably, after 5-6 years, I don't know, of, let's say, noise / sense making, okay, we've managed to realize here's a pile of just noise, here's a pile where it's still, we got to filter it out. So hence it's so important. So I fully now, I think, understand why, or I better
Well,
understand your position.
Yeah, and I want to say, right, like there's a time and place for everything, right? So things that might be noise at one place might be valuable at another place.
Right.
And so the fact that someone's contribution gets rejected means that they're not at the right place. It doesn't mean that their contribution isn't valuable. Like we need to realize that's
Right. And I was having a discussion earlier today with Ahmed, who had a lovely conversation on Agapic Orientation, Manuel's channel with Manuel. And, what we were talking about is he said, well, in the West, you guys have lines, and lines are wonderful. And I really appreciate lines. He's living in Germany now, by the way. So he's like, yeah, I really, there's some real stuff. But in Lebanon, right, people don't get in line. Everybody kind of jostles for position around each other, and they sort of do this thing, this Middle Eastern sort of thing, right? And I said, well, yeah, I get it, but like lines don't form from nothing. Lines form from that process. And then I gave him an example, and I guess I'll just give it here because it's easy. So years ago, I was at a science fiction convention. I happen to know a lot of people at this particular. And the interesting thing about the convention was there was an artist there named Roger Dean, who I'm rather fond of because he did some album covers and some artwork for video games and stuff that I really like. And we went and bought some prints. And the guy said, oh, Roger Dean's coming down in like an hour and a half to sign things. And we were like, what? Oh, well, let's get that done. Now that we bought these beautiful prints, we can get them signed by the person who did the original artwork. This is wonderful. But it was a ways away. So he said, oh, he's going to sit at that table. So we're like, all right, well, whatever. And we sat for a while, and then we got bored and wandered 50 feet away to the place where you could eat food. And so we were, hanging out there and having this conversation. We come back, and the line is formed, right? The line is formed. And we knew where he was going to sit. And they sort of had an idea, so they had lined up. We went to the front because we were there first of all. But also, when Roger got there, he needed stuff. And so we directed two of the kids who were milling about in the front by the table, who weren't in line. And we said, you go get this and you go get that. Let's get this done. So we organized all of this stuff. And then we put the kids in front of us because we were the two managers, basically. We put the kids in front of us, and they got their stuff signed first. And my buddy got his stuff signed third, and I got my stuff signed fourth. And there was some grumbling in the line about they cut the line, which A, wasn't true, but they didn't know because they weren't there, right? And B, we did all the work to make sure that you guys could get your stuff signed. Like, come on, have a little gratitude, right? And so there's a way in which lines are great, but they're the middle of the story. They happen after the civilization, like after you go through the Middle East phase, we'll call it in this case, right? Where things are sort of, all broken up and broken apart and people jostle. But you need some way to determine hierarchy, to determine who and what's important. And the thing that emerges is leadership and authority. And not in all cases, and it's not a perfect system, because emergence is a very chaotic, imperfect system. But that's where the emergence is handy, right? Is in creating the structure and letting people find their room in the structure, right? And then when structures get so big, people have to be assigned because once the structure is full or gets full, your options go down, and then somebody needs to make a decision, right? And that's why you need a leader to make it. And the decision may be arbitrary, but it has to be made. So the fact that it's arbitrary is not relevant to the fact that a decision has to happen. And lines and formation are the same way. There's always a component of gathering up. So when I was at Thunder Bay, for example, I was in a room with my buddy Ethan, who I drove to Thunder Bay. I took him from Minneapolis Airport, and he was like, well, I think I want to ask a question. I'm like, well, you better get in line quick, because the line is going to form. And before the line forms, we're literally all milling about the room, actually. Like, we're actually just all standing up, milling about the room. And then how the line is going to be determined and where it starts is given to us. And then people do the Middle Eastern thing, and they jockey for position in the forming line, right? And so that's that's how it works. It's not like lines emerge and the world doesn't start there. The world always starts with this chaotic formation.
Michael, what do you think?
Let's see, that was a lot of stuff. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think yeah, there is a need for all that stuff, and it's okay that it's arbitrary sometimes. So just like, that's why I keep saying the thing about like a tent. Like, if you're going to build a city, first you got to build a tent because you got to do something to keep the rain off your head before you do the other thing. So, but I think it's just So that's what we got to do. Build a tent, and then when we're in the tent, we can figure out the bigger plan or the next step or whatever. So
Mark, what does
I'm gonna go. So I'll talk to you guys later.
Mike. Lovely to see you.
Bye, Michael. And this also, like, if you guys could expand on, let's say you have your navigating patterns, you have your channel, right?
Mhm.
But let's say, so Michael's saying I'm building a little tent, or I'm or I'm planting my flag, right? I'm doing my school. What is your move? How do you see this materializing with regard? And I'm sorry, I'm using the term material.
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, it's important. Like, material is important. We can't.
No, of course. I'm just talking to you. But how are you materializing what you're discussing?
Right. No, it's a perfect phrase in this particular case. It's like the materialist frame. It's perfect. Right. And I told this to Michael. I said, well, I don't know what you need or what you have, but you let me know if there's something you think I can contribute. Because I just learned about his idea. Right. And so I'm like, all right, well, I don't even know where you are yet. Like, where is your flag planted? Right? How much land do you have? How much ability do you have? How much time do you have? Like, is this the right time for you to implement this? Like, if you have a baby on the way, maybe you're not going to start to school for another 3 years just due to time constraints, right? Because the time constraints in a marriage aren't yours alone. They're also your spouse's, right? Because if your spouse is pregnant, you're all your priorities get bumped automatically. Like, it's not, or if your spouse is in distress, right? Or if there's a dozen different ways in which that affects you directly. So I don't know if he's ready. When he's ready, I have some ideas. Like, I've started 8 businesses. I have experience in a variety of things, and maybe none of that is relevant or helpful to him. But I'm available. Like,
so I'm asking you as Mark, like, I'm sitting down. I wrote, like, we actually touched on a lot of topics I wrote down to discuss, right? So I look at myself and be like, okay, right now, my kids are down. I did my work. I'm gonna stream now for 2 hours. Like, this is like a mini version of participation, right? And I'm gonna say, I want to have a conversation which isn't like, hey, PBK, YouTube Protestant, right? I want to come and say, like, how do I move forward? Right? So we speak a little more about Michael, and I guess I'm trying to say, like, okay, so I more understand Manuel, and I want to say, like, okay, like, I want to give people the sense making. I want to get people this wisdom, and then I want to, set them free. Do your thing. Like, now you did it, right? So Manuel, like, what is that? How does that look like to you? Like, and I guess, like, what do you need? Like, be like, here's $1 million. Like, what are you doing with that now?
Well, okay. So first of all, like, I don't care about the $1 million. I care about
$10 million.
No. I care about the people that I work with, right? So I want to first see, okay, like, who do we have and what can they do, right? And then, like, I have 2 questions, right? Like, how can I facilitate the individual, and how can I integrate the activity of the individuals? That's the 2 questions I have.
yeah, because there's constraints in your available resources. And so the first step is, as I indicated with Michael, what are your current available resources? And what resources do you need for your aim? Right? Because that's really the question. And then if you're building, we'll say, a wisdom community, right? Which is my focus. We want to build wisdom communities. We don't want to make every...
Isn't what this looks like? Like it doesn't start with you being like, I have a wisdom channel, and then everyone gets up and suddenly says, what?
No. See, this is all too propositional. So wisdom is all about participation. Like, and I think explicitly.
That I understand. I guess my point is, like, doesn't need to start from propositional though.
No. Look, everyone gets this backwards. Okay, believe it or not, as hard as this may be to imagine, there was a time when bipedal human-like creatures that would become us with roughly our same brain power had no language, and yet they still managed to form things like meaning. Right? Why? Because participatory knowledge is way more important, way more significant, way more base than proposition.
Even participatory knowledge, which is deeper, and this sort of relates in a certain extent back to the child's version of sort of participating in it. However, and it's true that it's sort of instinctual. You would say at this day and age, don't you still need to create like a forum for that so people know that they're invited?
You need that, but you don't need to create that propositionally. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be propositional about it. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying that the emphasis of relying on the propositions is a mistake. And it's a bad mistake. Like, the primary thing is participation. It's what you do. So in other words, if you talk about meditation and you say you make a meditation app because you're Sam Harris and your meditation app is of one type of meditation, so you're not giving everybody full flavor of meditation, et cetera, right? Or you do a meditation series on YouTube, right? And you just publish those recorded videos. That's not the same as doing 2.5+ years of meditation with John Vervaeke. Even though he wasn't there for the whole time, right? There was a YouTube live stream and that went for so long, and then that ended, but we had already transitioned to doing it daily on the Discord.
Is that just like not walk, like, just don't talk the talk, walk the walk at the end of the day? You're saying, like, okay, you need to sit down.
No. Like, you need to know what walk, how to walk it, and where to go. Like,
right.
I'm with you. I'm just saying, back to the propositional, like, so I feel like in this form, there's a lot of talk the talk.
Right.
No, that's
to me, yes.
Right. That's the objection that Jacob has. That's the objection that we have. BOM is great. BOM should continue. BOM does. BOM should change nothing. Nobody's telling BOM what to do, right? More just
I'm just writing this down. Mark wants to destroy BOM. Okay, fine.
Yeah, you might as well, because that's the way they're treating everything, right?
But you hear the frustration
for what we're doing, right? Because what we're doing is more specific to the engagement, right? Because that's important, that every day at a certain time, people are meditating together. That's actually important. Whether they're actually meditating or praying, it doesn't matter to us. Some people come in and pray, some people meditate, some people use their own meditation. I don't care. Some people just sit silently and wait for us. Whatever, I don't care. But we're all together in that space at that time, even though it's a virtual space. Suboptimal, but better than nothing.
Which which arguably, and Manuel, I would like to know what you think about this. There's a conversation, like you could say, okay, if you're spending another 2 hours, and like you just said, I don't care if you're Zen sitting, if you're doing Kundalini yoga, if you're just thinking, okay, but you're participating, which you would categorize as different than participating in a conversation about participating.
Right. So what I wanted to say is, especially the people that end up here, like most of them have trauma, right? Like they have engaged in the school system and they've been let down effectively, right? And they've made up their mind, right? And like a lot of them are really propositional stuff, right? Like so there's all of these ways, these behaviorisms that have snuck in, right? Like they're not inherent in being human. They're cultivated by not being attentive to what you're cultivating effectively, right? And having no way of judging what you're doing as well, right? So what you first need to do is and this is why meditation is a good tool if you can manage to do it, is you need to start getting the awareness of like, oh, I'm doing this, right? Like I'm self-sabotaging in this way. When I'm in the conversation and I start my rant and I don't know the purpose of the rant in relation to the conversation, I'm making a mistake, right? Like people get that insight after over 2 years of meditation, right? It takes them so long to realize that. And so recognizing that is a thing, right? Like that, and people are so far away from that insight that means that there's a bunch of work to do. And just talking to people and saying nice things about everything is one or something, right? Or just believing God isn't sufficient. Like it's not, right? Like it might be helpful in some conditions, but in other conditions, that's not what these people need, right? And then it's like, yeah, not everybody can meditate, right? So you can do yoga or whatever, right? And prayer, right? And there's not one type of prayer. So I would find it amazing if we have multiple prayer groups, right? But I also want the prayer groups to be intentional about the way that people participate in prayer. Because like what happens when you go into church, right? You go into church and people say, well, you say this, right? Like this is the prayer, and you try real hard, effectively, right? And if you're lucky, they say a little bit more, right? But it's not easy to understand, and you need handles to see, to open up, right? Like you need to get the eyes to see, right? And I guess that's the thing that I and Mark have been trying to figure out. Like, how do you get the eyes to see, right? And that's a prerequisite for the wisdom cultivation, right? And I don't think you can separate these two, right?
Well, don't you need to have? I hear what you're saying. I would say, arguably, whether it's via meditation or is there not something about this channel? And you could be like, yes, there was, but like it's been 6 years where we want to make sure people feel comfortable to have that realization and not feel, let's say, crippled by that. Like you would want someone to be able to, let's say, then 2 years into this conversation, be ranting, and then I'll catch myself and say, I don't know where I was going with this. I'm really sorry if I derailed. Now, I'm only going to say that if I've experienced here in the past, me going on a rant and you saying, that's okay. I hear where you're coming from. Thanks for sharing. Now, like it's sort of, does that make sense that you would have to be a space where like one is allowed to sort of get lost? Now you could be like, okay, you've been getting lost for 6 years. Everyone had a good time. Now let's start like tightening up. So
yes, you're allowed to get lost, but people have to realize this is also a scaling problem, right? It's like get lost in a one-on-one conversation, please. Like don't get lost in a group conversation, because now you're.
Yep, get lost, people. Get lost. Actually, don't get lost. Go to Father Eric's channel. Bye.